Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, I'm going to walk you through what happens when mule deer bucks finally leave the does and how to adjust your tactics to find and kill them post-rut. Through November, bucks are glued to doe groups. In some areas, even later. They're going to be cycling constantly, fighting, checking, and burning energy. But sooner than later, many hunters realize that dynamic shifts. As the rut tapers, bucks begin slipping away from doe clusters. They stop rushing around openly and fall back into a survival mode built around feed efficiency, security, and recovering from the grind of the rut. If you've ever glassed a drainage full of does in late November, December, whatever it is in your area, but saw no mature bucks, you've probably seen this phase in action. The big boys weren't gone, they simply pulled back. They're often bedded in small, tucked away pockets somewhere adjacent to winter range, focused on rebuilding body conditioning while keeping just enough distance to monitor does without exposing themselves. This transition marks a new challenge. You're no longer hunting wide open rut chaos. You're hunting a tired, calculated animal that only moves when he needs to. In this episode, we'll break down the timing of this shift, where bucks go when they leave the does, how to read fresh post-rut sign, and how to glass and move through terrain without blowing limited opportunities. We'll talk about why midday can suddenly become productive again, how storms and cold snaps influence predictability, and why still hunting microhabitats can be deadly when bucks are locked into tight bed zones. If you know how to adjust your mindset, you're going to find post-rut bucks far more predictable than a lot of hunters think. At the end of the rut, everything about mule deer bucks' priorities shift. Through November, maybe December in your area, breeding dominates their behavior. Bucks burn calories like crazy, chasing, fighting, and covering massive distances. They abandon safe bedding areas, feed inconsistently, and move in daylight without hesitation. But once does are no longer regularly coming into estrus, that energy isn't productive anymore. So the reward for roaming disappears. At this moment, biology snaps them into a new mode, survival and recovery. The first big driver behind bucks leaving does is energy deficit. A mature mule deer buck comes out of the rut with depleted fat reserves and elevated stress. If he continued rut-style movement, he'd burn more calories than he could replace, pushing him towards starvation. Instead, he does the smartest thing he can. He slips away from the chaos, finds predictable feed, and conserves energy in a secure pocket where movement is minimal. The second driver is security. During the rut, bucks tolerate exposure because breeding is urgent. After the rut, that urgency vanishes and security matters again. Older bucks especially move back into bed systems that protect them from sight, wind, and predators. They avoid open slopes and return to steep cuts, broken timber, and micro-terrain like small benches behind a rock spine, a little strip of timber above grassy pockets, or north-facing corners that hold shade and stay quiet. The third driver is reduced need to interact with does. Bucks still keep loose tabs on nearby doe groups, often staying within a reasonable travel loop to check for the occasional late cycle doe, but they no longer hover on top of the herd. Instead, they post up just far enough away that they can scent check from a distance, often from slightly different elevations. This creates the illusion that bucks have vanished, but they haven't. They've simply taken a half step out of the main activity zone and into a quieter corner. One more piece. Post-rut bucks often shift back into well-defined home ranges, familiar country where they know every escape route, wind seam, and bedding option. During the rut, bucks drift as estrus waves pull them across terrain. Post-rut, they return home. If you know their preferred home range from earlier scouting, your search becomes much more targeted. The moment bucks leave the does, the hunt becomes more about subtle movement, microhabitat, and patient glassing. You're no longer waiting for a buck to come barreling through a doe group. You're dissecting small pockets of cover, slight terrain folds, and specific bed to feed patterns. Understanding when mule deer bucks leave does post-rut is one of the most important pieces of this entire strategy. If you get the timing right, you'll know when to stop hunting doe hubs and start keying in on tighter, more isolated buck pockets. If you get it wrong, you'll spend a lot of days glassing doe groups that simply aren't holding mature deer anymore. The shift away from does begins gradually, not all at once. In most western mule deer country, peak rut hits sometime mid-November. During this window, bucks are locked into doe groups almost constantly. Toward late November, the first wave of estrus fades, and you'll begin to see fewer mature bucks glued directly to does. Younger bucks still mill around, but the big dominant deer start slipping away. The initial separation phase often happens in the last week of November into the first week of December in a lot of the states centered around Wyoming. Not all bucks leave simultaneously. Some linger near the primary groups, especially if there's still a few late cycle does around. However, once a buck realizes the odds are low that another hot doe is going to show up, his priorities change fast. Big bucks are biologically driven to conserve energy and recover condition. They know they can't afford to keep burning calories without reward in cold weather. By early December, the trend is noticeable. The majority of mature bucks have eased off in direct doe association. They're still nearby, often within a few hundred yards to a half mile of the main wintering groups, but they aren't right in the middle of them anymore. Instead, they drift into adjacent pockets of cover where they can feed and bed with minimal disturbance. By mid-December, the shift is usually complete. Mature bucks have settled into more consistent post-rut patterns, bedding in secure, shaded areas, and feeding on whatever high-value forage is available nearby. Your job now is no longer to glass over large doe groups waiting for a buck to show. It's to identify the microhabitats just off winter range where a buck can live comfortably with minimal energy output. If you're hunting later January in some seasons, the separation is nearly absolute. Bucks move even less, often bedding close to where they feed. They may still scent check does periodically, but those loops are short and usually timed around first and last light. During this period, the best hunting is often found in the most overlooked pockets, small benches, shaded timber edges, and isolated fingers with wind protection. It's important to remember that timing shifts with conditions. And early, deep snow can pull deer down sooner, accelerating the post-rut pattern. Mild weather can delay it slightly. But regardless of conditions, the same rule holds true. As does stop cycling, big bucks separate to feed, rest, and recover. The key indicators that the shift has begun are subtle. Doe groups are still present, but you're only seeing small bucks with them. Big tracks appear near, but not within doe clusters. You're seeing less midday buck movement. Glassing pockets 100 to 800 yards off winter range reveals singles or pairs of deer, often bucks. When these signs show up, it's time to switch gears. Stop camping on the does, start glassing adjacent pockets. Bucks didn't vanish, they just slid into quieter terrain. Now, once mule deer bucks leave the does, their priorities compress into three things: recover energy, stay safe, and find dependable feed. Everything they do revolves around those needs, and if you understand what drives them during this phase, you can narrow your search dramatically. The first post-rut priority is energy recovery. November takes a tremendous toll on a mature buck. Weeks of chasing, fighting, breeding, and long-distance travel strip away fat stores and muscle mass. A buck that continues burning calories at rut levels risks winter starvation. So the moment that primary breeding window closes, he becomes a minimalist. He limits travel, beds in thermally efficient pockets, and feeds on the best groceries close to home. Instead of covering huge ground or checking multiple basins, he will anchor himself in a small zone, often only a few hundred yards in radius, that gives him everything he needs without exposing himself. The second priority is security. After a month of reckless daylight movement, vulnerability declines and caution returns. A mature buck reverts to what he knows: terrain that provides escape routes, wind advantage, and natural concealment. North-facing pockets, benches tucked behind timber, broken rock faces, and steep side hills become valuable again. These spots are not random. They're chosen for predictability, consistent wind, visual cover, and terrain escape. A buck's bedroom is often so tight that casual glassing won't reveal him. You need slow, repeated passes to pick out an ear or an antler. The third priority is accessible feed. After weeks of neglecting groceries, bucks go looking for the highest quality forage available on the landscape. That doesn't mean the greenest grass. It means nutrient-dense shrubs and woody browse they can access without burning calories. Bitterbrush, sage, serviceberry, and Mount mahogany become primary fuels. Bucks choose locations where these food sources are close to their bedding, sometimes within a couple hundred yards, allowing them to feed briefly during low-risk windows. This combination of priorities pulls bucks into very specific post-rut terrain, places where food, cover, and thermals all converge. These zones are often found slightly off of main wintering slopes, just far enough away from concentrated doe groups to minimize energy costs and avoid constant harassment from younger bucks. Think of these areas as back eddies behind the current. The herd flows along open winter range. The buck is tucked just behind it, drifting quietly. Another post priority worth noting is efficiency with thermals. Bucks bed in locations where thermals are stable, typically downward for much of the day in shaded areas. This gives them predictable scent coverage. When they rise to feed or rebed, they'll often move only when air movement is clean. That's why post-rut movement windows are narrower. A buck waits until conditions favor him. Finally, older bucks avoid conflict now. During the rut, they spend energy pushing younger deer. After the rut, they don't waste calories fighting or babysitting doe groups. They choose isolation or small bachelor-like arrangements, sometimes pairing with another mature buck for mutual benefit. These tiny, quiet clusters are easy to overlook, but they often hold your best opportunity. Understanding these priorities helps you filter terrain fast. You're looking for the places that satisfy all three needs: low energy cost, security, and accessible winter forage. If a slope has feed but no cover, he'll skip it. If it has cover but no feed, he's not going to stay. If it has both but inconsistent wind, he'll bed nearby instead. But when all three align, that's your hot zone. When the rut winds down and bucks break away from the does, they don't disappear randomly into the mountains. They retreat to specific terrain features that provide security, predictable wind, and easy access to feed. These pockets are often close to wintering areas but tucked just out of sight, the kind of places a lot of hunters look right past while glassing the obvious slopes holding does. The first place to look is north-facing cover. Throughout most mule deer range, north aspects hold shade, cooler temps, and tighter cover compared to southern slopes. Post-rut bucks gravitate towards these areas because they offer thermal consistency and visual protection. On clear, high-pressure days, these slopes stay darker and quieter, reducing the chance of being spotted. Bucks bed in small, shaded micro-pockets behind rocks, inside brush lines, and under timber edges, where they can monitor the country below while maintaining invisibility. Just adjacent to these bedding pockets, you're going to find the groceries, the bitterbrush, the sage, the mahogany, and maybe even willow pockets on slightly warmer benches or breaks in the terrain. Bucks position themselves so feeding requires minimal travel. They may only take a short loop at first or last light, feeding briefly before slipping back into the timber. Sometimes bucks bed within a few bounds of feed, especially in January if winter is severe. The next productive place to look is the backside of winter ranges, the subtle terrain just behind the main doe concentrations. In many basins, does pile onto exposed south or west-facing winter slopes. Mature bucks, instead of staying right with them, will slide over the ridge or drop onto a small finger pocket adjacent to the main herd. They want the conveniences of winter range: open feed, warmer slopes, predictable movement, without being harassed by younger bucks or exposed to hunters glassing the does. These adjacent pockets are often the most overlooked spots on the mountain. You'll also find post-rut bucks using steep, broken side hills. These are the benches, the rock shelves, and ledges where a buck can keep wind in his face and an escape route below. Because the terrain is rugged, predators approach with difficulty. To a buck, this is high-value real estate, secure, quiet, and thermally advantageous. These pockets may be small, 30 to 100 yards across, but they can hold a giant buck for weeks if the conditions are right. Another common location is subtle fingers and micro basins. These are tucked pockets off a main drainage that don't show well from big glassing knobs. They may be just one contour line off of obvious winter range, a crease, a tree pocket, or a brush hole. Bucks love these because very few hunters glass them thoroughly. If you find does on a big open slope, always check the nearby fingers and shaded edges. That's where mature bucks often peel off to recover. Don't overlook low elevation security pockets, especially in harsher winters. When snow gets deep up high, bucks will slide lower, sometimes into terrain that feels too easy. They may use small creek bottoms or willow strips and tangled sage hills near private boundaries. These are classic post-rut hideouts. Bucks trade some distance from prime winter feed for cover, consistent thermals, and reduced hunting pressure. Finally, post-rut bucks often return to pre-rut home ranges. The rut pulls bucks out of their familiar core area, but once breeding winds down, they head right back to the country they know best. If you documented summer or early fall buck behavior, trails, bedding benches, feeding pockets, revisit those spots. The big deer that vacated in November may drift back after the rut. The key to all this is understanding proximity. Bucks don't abandon the does completely. They simply slide away to more isolated, energy-efficient pockets. Most post-rut bucks zones are within a half mile of primary doe concentrations. So as you glass doe groups, don't ask, where are the bucks? Look just off the edge, often one ridge over or one contour down or one shady pocket away. When bucks pull away from does, they don't leave a ton of noisy, obvious sign behind. The rut is full of visual markers like big tracks, fresh rubs, scattered deer, right? But most post-rut movement becomes subtle, conservative, and harder to recognize unless you know exactly what to look for. This is where your ability to read small clues like tracks, trails, beds, snow disturbance, and poop become the deciding factor between relocating a mature buck or wasting time in dead country. The first and most reliable post-rut indicator is track size and spacing. Mature mule deer bucks leave larger, deeper, and more widely spaced tracks than does and young bucks. The stride is longer, the print itself is heavier, and in snow you'll often see a longer toe drag. The difference becomes even clearer in late season because the deer are moving less, so individual tracks stand out more. You aren't looking for a highway, you're looking for a quiet, parallel line of bigger tracks, often just off the main doe trails. If you find giant tracks running solo or paired through a shaded pocket, you're close. Snow becomes a huge advantage. In November with patchy snow, timing can be tricky, but once consistent snow settles, anything fresh is obvious. Look at the edges of the track. Crisp walls mean recent movement. Rounded or winded softened edges mean that they're older. If a track has soft powder inside, it's fresh. If it has a thin crust or surface sheen, it's older. A fresh track at or above a bedding pocket can tell you exactly where a buck is heading or already lying. Trails tell you how committed deer are to an area. Doe groups will continue to pound heavy contour lines between bed and feed. Post-rut bucks usually don't use those same trails directly anymore. Instead, they hold an offset travel line 50 to 300 yards away. This faint side route is the money sign. It confirms a buck is living close but staying separate. If you can find where this faint trail intersects a small bench or a cover seam or a rocky cut with predictable wind, you've found a great ambush site. Beds are easily overlooked but massively important. Post-rut buck beds are quieter and more isolated than those in November. You're going to find them in shade, north-facing edges, brushy benches, behind rocks or timber. In snow, a fresh bed will have melted impressions and crisp outlines and sometimes hair. If you find a warm-edged bed within 100 to 200 yards of good browse, that buck is probably still in the area and living tight. Poop is also going to confirm timing. Fresh pellets are shiny, dark, and often soft. Older pellets dry fast in cold air. Buck pellets tend to be slightly larger and more scattered, while doe and young buck pellets cluster tighter. Finding fresh buck pellets along a faint parallel line or near a hidden bench tells you you're in a current holding zone. Rubs are less valuable now, right? It's late. Most rutting rubs are at least weeks old. But a freshly reopened rub in early post-rut can signal a mature buck still monitoring a nearby doe group. Use it only as supporting evidence, never as the primary indicator. Another overlooked clue is snow disturbance on entry and exit routes. Post-rut bucks reuse the same small loops repeatedly. If he's feeding only at dawn and dusk, his trail in and out of the pocket will show repeated use. Pressed snow, larger tracks, maybe a few pellets. These loops tell you exactly where to intercept him. And finally, pay attention to absence of new sign. If you have does feed in wintering terrain but no fresh big tracks, that mature buck is already shifted. Don't wait him out. Post-rut bucks don't wander. They relocate on purpose to survive. If sign is stale, move to the next adjacent pocket. The goal is to confirm two things. A mature buck is in the zone and he's still using it now, not last week. When you can read the difference between fresh and old movement, you stop hunting where bucks were and start hunting where they are now. After the rut winds down and bucks slip away from does, the biggest mistake a lot of hunters make is continuing to glass the same big open wintering slopes where doe groups feed. Mature bucks are still nearby, but they're no longer going to be exposing themselves. Glassing and e-scouting are now about finding pockets, not crowds. When you understand where to look and how to pick apart tight cover, you'll start turning up bucks other hunters never knew were there. Start with e-scouting before you ever hit the slope. Look just off primary wintering areas. If does are spread across a big south or west-facing hillside, mark the adjacent north-facing finger ridges or timbered benches and broken little pockets nearby. These are the first places bucks go after they leave the does. You want to identify terrain that offers security like timber, broken rock, and cuts, steady thermals, feed close by like bitterbrush, sage, or mahogany, and a minimal travel radius. On a map, these look like shallow bowls, tight benches, dark timber strips, and small side pockets that don't open into a full basin. If you can't see these features from a high vantage, you're probably going to miss the buck. Once in country, glassing is your primary tool, but post-rut glassing is different from rut glassing. When bucks are with does, you can pan fast and catch cruising movement easily. Post-rut, however, you must slow everything down. You're looking for pieces, an ear, an antler tine, a horizontal line, and a shadow. Break basins into microzones and glass each pocket repeatedly. Bucks may not move much throughout the day, so you must catch them where they are, not where you hope they pass. Your first glassing priority is shaded bedding edges, timberlines, brush pockets, small benches under rocky bluffs. Those spots hide bucks better than any open hillside. Pick apart those edges. Look for antler tips above brush or the curve of a back in the shade. Focus on the downwind, darker side of terrain features where thermals settle early and stay consistent. Your second priority is feed to bed edges. Post-rut bucks rarely leave their pockets for long. They feed close, so find bitterbrush and sage on or just below timber pockets. Bucks will often rise, feed for a few minutes, then return to bed. If you're glassing the open feed only, you're going to miss them. Instead, you've got to watch the transition line between the cover and the groceries. Midday becomes productive again in post-rut phases. Bucks may get up to rebed adjacent to changing thermals or feed briefly. Unlike the rut, their movement is tight, maybe only 50 to a couple hundred yards, but that's enough to expose them. So use midday to regrid the pockets where you suspect they're bedded. If thermals are steady, you can even move position along a side hill to glass new angles without blowing the buck. If you turn up a buck but don't have a shot, don't rush. Post-rut bucks aren't going far unless pressured. Watch him, learn his bed, then back out, plan your access, and make your move when the wind is bulletproof. One last glassing advantage: fresh snow is a cheat code. New snow tells you immediately which pockets are alive. If you glass a slope after fresh snow and there are no fresh tracks or old ones leading to cover, that basin is probably dead and it's time to move. If you see fresh tracks bouncing into a finger draw or timber strip, there's a buck in there. Slow down and glass until you turn him up. The key to post-rut glassing is discipline. Don't abandon a pocket just because you don't see a deer in 5 minutes. Bucks are there, they're just tucked in. The hunters who consistently kill post-rut bucks are the ones who work every piece of cover deliberately and trust the process. Once mule deer bucks separate from the does, their world shrinks. They're no longer cruising ridges all day or bouncing between doe groups in a frenzy. Their movement becomes surgical, short, energy efficient, and often tied to security. But that doesn't mean they stop moving entirely. If you understand when and why post-rut bucks get up, you'll find windows of opportunity a lot of hunters overlook. The first window is midday adjustment movement. After a cold night, bucks often bed in a position that gives them maximum thermal advantage. But as the morning progresses, thermals shift. Air begins moving differently around bedding pockets, and sunlight changes the temperature and shade structure. When that happens, bucks subtly reposition. Sometimes they just stand, stretch, and bed again a few yards away. Other times they side hill into a more secure or better ventilated pocket. These moves are small, maybe only 20, maximum couple hundred yards, and they expose deer that haven't shown themselves since first light. Most hunters hike back to camp at midday or glass lazily through the heat haze. Meanwhile, smart hunters are locked in, patiently dissecting timber edges, shady corridors, and the mouth of small pockets where a buck might rebed. Those windows aren't about seeing bucks run across basins. They're about catching a tine. They're a body shift when the deer thinks nobody's watching. The second opportunity comes during low pressure periods. Post-rut bucks react sharply to pressure. Even one bow hunter slipping through the wrong side hill can send deer miles into a new drainage. But when pressure is low or other hunters are focused on doe herds, bucks settle and move on their terms. Days with fewer hunters, midweek stretches, or weather that keeps casual hunters home can be the best of the season. In these windows, a buck may shift earlier in the evening or stand longer in the morning because he feels no urgency to stay buried. Another overlooked window is pre-storm movement. A winter storm rolling in triggers behavior. Bucks know harsh weather is coming. They feel it before you do. As pressure drops and wind picks up, they'll often feed a little further or move earlier to adjust bedding positions. This can expose deer that have been ghosts for days. If you see a storm coming, glass every minute of the day leading up to it. Movement spikes. Then, during the storm itself, deer hunker. When the storm breaks, action fires back up as bucks refresh their loops, feed, and rebed. Wind shifts influence in micro movement too. If wind swings from predictable to swirly, bucks may leave a bed and slip into a pocket where air stabilizes. These slides are fast and efficient. Again, only tens or hundreds of yards, but they can be seen if you're glassing with purpose. Watch known bedding pockets closely during wind changes. That's when a buck's going to stand up and move. Finally, consider the zero movement illusion. Just because a buck hasn't exposed himself doesn't mean he hasn't moved. A post-rut deer might make 3 or 4 tiny moves during the day, each undercover, each invisible unless you're dissecting every crack in the timber. The key is repeated glassing from slightly different angles. 10 yards to the left or right can reveal what was hidden behind a branch earlier. The takeaway is simple. Post-rut bucks move less, but not none. Their movement is subtle. If you're in the right basin, watching the right pocket, ready to capitalize during midday adjustments, pre-storm windows, and low pressure days, you're going to catch deer other hunters never knew existed. Killing a post-rut mule deer buck often comes down to one skill: moving slowly and precisely enough to slip inside his tight little world without him ever knowing you were there. After bucks leave the does, they shrink their radius. They bed in small pockets, feed close, and only make short, calculated moves. That means you're not hunting an animal covering miles. You're hunting a deer living inside a few hundred yards. Still hunting and smart pinpoint setups are the tools that let you capitalize on reality. Killing a post-rut mule deer buck often comes down to one skill: moving slowly and precisely enough to slip inside his tight little world without him ever knowing you're there. After bucks leave the does, they shrink their radius. They bed in small pockets, feed close, and only make short, calculated moves. That means you're not hunting an animal covering miles. You're hunting a deer living inside a few hundred yards. Still hunting and smart pinpoint setups are the tools that let you capitalize on that reality. Still hunting post-rut is about micro movement. You're not cruising a hillside hoping to bump into deer. You're dissecting terrain step by step, only moving when sound and air give you permission. The best days to still hunt are when there's noise cover, light wind, falling snow, moving tree branches, creek noise. If the woods are dead calm and crunchy, I wouldn't force it. You're going to educate the basin. But when there's enough ambient noise to hide your movement, you can slip into places where bucks are bedded, watching the country from deep inside. Before you take your first step, you need an objective. Still hunt with a destination, a specific pocket, bench, timber strip, or rock face. Wandering to see what you see is the fastest way to waste energy and blow out deer. Instead, identify a likely pocket 200 to 400 yards away. Then plan a route that keeps the wind ideal and your visibility controlled. Take a short line, stop, glass. Take another short line, stop, glass. The time between steps should be minutes, not seconds. The buck you're after may be 50 yards ahead or 250, holding still, watching his escape line. You must find him before he finds you. The most productive still hunting routes are parallel and above bottom of slope feed. Bucks bed slightly above the grocery, so giving them visual and thermal advantage. Work those contour lines, moving just inside the cover where your outline isn't skylined. Glass ahead every time you stop, into shadows, under overhanging limbs, along brush lines. Look for shapes that don't match their surroundings. The curve of a back, an ear, a patch of hair. Mature bucks rarely lie broadside in the open. They bury themselves, watching one direction while trusting thermals to cover the other. A powerful still hunting tactic is to hunt the second line, the hidden band between open feed and deep timber. Does often feed on the open slope. Younger bucks hover near them, but mature bucks slip through the seam, that narrow strip of cover where they can monitor the herd without being seen. If you can still hunt that seam quietly, you'll catch bucks repositioning or feeding in the shadows. Setups are equally important. If you locate a good pocket and sign tells you a mature buck is using it, sometimes the best move is to pick a kill tree or rock and wait. Post-rut bucks often repeat the same tiny pattern. Bed, stand, feed a few bites, rebed. They'll do this several times throughout the day. If you set up with good wind and visibility over a bedding pocket or feed edge, patience will eventually give you a shot. This is especially deadly after you've watched a buck go into a pocket but lost visual. Don't force him out. Wait for his next move. When you're setting up, prioritize wind. Consistent thermals are non-negotiable. Visual lanes, small windows into shade pockets or feed edges. Cover, shadows are better than just trees. And access, quiet entry and quiet exit. It's worth noting that sometimes you don't need to move at all. If you've glassed a likely bedding pocket, can't see the buck, but know he's there based on tracks or behavior, lock down and wait. Post-rut bucks are reluctant to leave secure beds during daylight unless pressured or weather drives them. If you have the wind and the visibility, patience kills. One final point, don't push a pocket twice. If you still hunt into a micro basin and bump a buck, that basin is probably burned for a while. Post-rut animals don't usually stick around when bumped. They relocate, and often not just one ridge over. Sometimes they slide completely out of the huntable zone. The better play is to assume a buck is there, move like he's watching, and only enter as far as you need to get your opportunity. Slow, quiet, intentional. Post-rut mule deer bucks live on a knife edge in winter. Every decision they make, where to bed, when to move, what direction to travel, is influenced by weather. Temperature, storms, wind direction, snow depth, and crust all dictate where a buck can survive with the least energy burned. If you understand how weather shapes their daily choices, you can predict where they'll relocate before they ever take a step. The single most powerful weather event in the post-rut period is a winter storm. Before a storm arrives, when pressure drops and wind picks up, bucks often feed more aggressively and reposition to secure bedding. This creates an excellent window to catch movement. During the storm itself, movement slows dramatically. Deer hunker to conserve heat, often holding in dense timber or tucked in basins. After the storm breaks, bucks resume short travel loops, feeding along cover edges and rebedding. Fresh snow now tells you exactly where they went. If you're in the right basin at first light, after snow, you're operating with live intel. Snow depth defines the boundaries of post-rut habitat. Early in winter, bucks may remain higher if slopes stay exposed, but once snow stacks up, they slide downslope to find reachable forage. Bitterbrush, sage, and mahogany become harder to access if buried. Deep snow also restricts movement. Traveling up or across steep terrain burns valuable calories. That's why you'll find bucks holding to side hills, lower benches, and wind-scoured pockets where feed remains open. When snow forces deer down, focus on terrain with both feed and adjacent security like smaller timber strips, broken folds, and mid-slope benches away from doe concentrations. Crusting changes everything. When warm days and cold nights form crusted snow, deer movement patterns tighten. Crust cuts legs, makes travel loud, and burns energy. Bucks avoid noisy crusted surfaces and move in areas with softer snow like north-facing timber, shady creases, and wind pocket zones where crust never fully sets. If everything is loud except a few shaded strips, bucks will be in those strips. Use this to eliminate dead ground quickly. Wind pockets determine bedding for mature bucks. Post-rut deer seek stability in air. If the wind is swirling, they will abandon a pocket and settle where wind and thermals run consistent, often under timber edges or in cut banks or behind rock seams. These microzones of stable wind give them predictable protection from predators. If you find a pocket where wind is steady, glass it repeatedly. Bucks will often use the same wind-favored spot day after day. Cold snaps drive energy conservation. When temperatures drop sharply, bucks spend even more time bedded, minimizing movement. They feed in brief windows and stay close to bedding. On the flip side, a cold snap followed by a clear, calm morning can bump movement slightly as deer try to fill their belly before returning to cover. If you can be in a place before first light on the first calm morning after bitter cold, you'll often see bucks on their feet. High pressure bluebird days are deceptive. Many hunters dismiss them as dead, but these are the best days to glass tight pockets because shadows are clean, thermals are predictable, and bucks stay glued to isolated terrain. You're unlikely to catch a buck cruising wide, but you're extremely likely to turn him up in predictable microbeds. These are precision days. Slow down and dissect. Finally, don't underestimate the power of repeated storm cycles. Each storm push compresses deer further into winter range or into new microhabitats. If you can track this progression, storm to storm, you'll know exactly how deer have shifted over days instead of guessing each time. The best late season hunters think in weather sequences, not just single weather occurrence days. The theme here is pretty simple. Weather doesn't just influence post-rut mule deer, it defines them. Every move a buck makes is tied to energy conservation and security, and weather is the trigger. Learn to anticipate what weather is coming and how deer will respond. Get ahead of the move, and you'll be waiting when the buck emerges. Many hunters fail to connect on post-rut mule deer not because bucks are impossible to find, but because the hunter is still using rut tactics in a post-rut world. When bucks leave the does, everything changes. They tighten their radius, prioritize survival, and move only when conditions favor them. If you can avoid the most common mistakes, your odds are going to rise dramatically. Mistake number one is camping on doe groups too long. Once mature bucks peel away from does, the doe clusters might hold small bucks, but the big deer are gone. Hunters waste days glassing the same doe herds expecting a giant to walk in. The fix is to shift your focus to the adjacent pockets, north-facing timber, finger draws, and broken benches within a half mile of wintering does. That's where the big bucks slide. Mistake number 2 is glassing too fast. Post-rut bucks don't run wide open. They bed tight and only show a tine or ear at times. Quick pans skip right over the deer you're actually hunting. The fix is to slow glass. Break a pocket into grids and reglass it over and over from slightly different angles. The buck is often there, you just have to see him. Mistake number 3 is hunting the middle instead of the edges. Big bucks rarely bed or feed within the main herds. They stay just off them where wind is reliable and pressure is low. The fix is to hunt the seams, that strip of cover on the edge of open feed where timber, brush, and shadow meet. That's the buck's highway. Mistake number 4 is ignoring micro features. Hunters often overlook tiny benches, shade pockets, and one-tree rims because they don't look big enough to hold a deer. The fix is to assume a mature buck can fit anywhere a deer can stand. If feed and cover are within 200 yards, glass every inch of it. Mistake number 5 is moving when thermals are wrong. Bucks leave pockets fast when they wind you and may not return. The fix is to only move when thermals are stable. If thermals are dropping, you got to stay below. When they rise, you've got to move above or side hill. Never force a move. Mistake number 6 is overpressuring bedding pockets. Hunters get impatient, dive into cover, and push bucks out. Post-rut bucks don't stick around when bumped. The fix is to still hunt or sit setups with a plan. If you need to push further, do it deliberately, once, not repeatedly. Better yet, wait him out. Mistake number 7 is ignoring midday. After the rut, midday repositioning is one of the best opportunities to spot a buck briefly as he stands and shifts. Hunters often miss this window. The fix is to stay locked in, glass through midday, watch shade edges and tight benches where bucks rebed. Mistake number 8 is leaving too soon after a storm. Hunters get discouraged during storms and bail. The storm break is prime time. The fix is to be there the morning after. Fresh tracks guide you immediately to active pockets. That short window can be the best of the week. Mistake number 9 is giving up too fast. Because bucks don't move much, hunters assume the basin is empty and leave after half a day. The fix is to know that if you see big tracks, fresh beds, or feed near cover, stay put. Bucks may only show themselves briefly once every day or two, so patience wins. Avoiding those mistakes keeps you in the game long after other hunters are packing up. The post-rut isn't about luck. It's about knowing where to look, how to move, and when to wait. If you're serious about taking this kind of knowledge deeper, that's exactly why I built Team Backbone. It's more than just a membership. It's a way to sharpen your edge with exclusive tools, strategies, and a tribe of hunters who refuse to quit. Inside, you're going to get 20% off site-wide on all Backbone Unlimited gear, a member-only t-shirt shipped to your door every month, not available anywhere else, full access to the digital content vault of guides, checklists, fitness and backcountry strategies and mindset training, a private Facebook group with direct access to me and a community of driven hunters who live relentless, direct call, text, or email access to me for personalized advice on training, hunting strategy, or just sharpening your edge, and automatic entry into monthly gear giveaways. This is built for the guys who train for the hunt, push themselves in the off season, and want to be part of a tribe that makes them better. If you're ready for that kind of inner circle, then Team Backbone is waiting for you at backboneunlimited.com underneath our membership tab. Thanks for being here. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.